Good evening, class. We're going to be doing some venting tonight. And what I'd like to do is to start with the chapter on venting. If you have your code books there, would you open up to the chapter on venting? It's chapter 1016. They call it a section. I'll call it a section or a chapter. And it's on page 173. Okay, we're only talking about 10 or so pages here tonight. So most of it will be those pages. Now, the question sheets that we didn't get to, the second and the third sheet, I went over them pretty closely. And 15 out of the 20 questions were from the chapter on venting. The 5 that were not on venting, most of them were on the previous chapter, which was drains, we'll cover separately. So what I'm going to do is, in the time that I have, which would be roughly a half hour, maybe 35 minutes, 2 brief segments, what I'll do is cover the venting as it applies to the questions. And with the time that we have left, I'll start at the beginning of the chapter and cover what wasn't on the question sheets. So with that, I'm going to start on page 174. I'm going to cover the material that you need to do the questions themselves. Okay, this is going to be, the question was minimum size vent through the roof. And this is something we've already covered, but for your information, if you want to write it down, the answer was and is, of course, 2-inch. So you have a roof. Remember that pipe coming through the roof. Try to make a whole pipe here. Is 2-inch. Okay, and while we have a little sketch, remember the length is 18 to 24 inches. Okay, 18 minimum, 24 maximum. I always like to measure from the back side so there won't be a problem. I'd go like maybe 20 inches here. But that's the code, 18 to 24. Now, also while we have it up here, this wasn't a question, but we did this in class already. If this is 2-inch up here, remember you can reduce this down to a smaller pipe size, right? This could be, in real life, it's 1.5 inches, but in the world of paperwork, it's 1.25 inches for the code, okay? And the distance from the roof where you do this is 1 foot. Okay, so a foot down from the roof, you can reduce it down to 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. In real life, it's 1.5 inches. Okay, that's a little more than the book gave us. They were just looking for the minimum size out the roof. Okay, so any vent out the roof cannot be smaller than 2-inch. And they don't mention it here, but the reason is because you would have what they call a frost closure. Right, frost closure is in the wintertime, you get a little ice, a little snow. Next thing you know, it's blocked off and the vent doesn't work. So it's been determined that this part of the country should have a vent not less than 2-inch. Okay, that was one question that on those 2 pages. Another one, you need this information here. This is a very interesting one. I've never seen it. I suspect if you worked in Boston or a bigger city, you would see it. And what they're looking for is how high a vent has to be out of roof where you have a garden, for example, a parking deck, observation deck, something other than a regular roof where nobody goes on it except to work on it. A garden would be a good example. And what they're saying is that they call it a vent extension through the roof. Of course, it can't be less than 2 inches in diameter, and chances are it's probably going to be the main vent. My guess is that they're probably going to have as few penetrations through that roof as possible, because you got to deal with supporting the pipe, which is another problem, and the height of it. So let's take a look at that. we'll just say you got a flat roof, and the pipe that comes through the roof, not a very good pipe. Try it again. I'll make it a 4-inch. But they're saying that this pipe has to be 8 feet from here to here. Okay, that way it's well above anybody's head, no matter how tall they are. Now, this was I never forgot this one. I had a test question, and many years ago, back in the 70s, there used to be a practical and a written portion of the plumbing exam. If you got past the written, as I recall, was first. If you got past that, then you went to the practical, where you actually did live, like with like in a shop, where you'd have to demonstrate something. We had to solder a fitting, and I remember an inspector who was giving this portion of the test. He asked me about this question here, and he could see that I was going to have to just kind of come up with some answer. I didn't know the answer, and what he said was, I'm trying to remember now. Back in the 70s, who was playing ball, but it was a famous basketball player. We'll say Wilt Chamberlain. I think it might have been Wilt Chamberlain. He said, "How tall is Wilt Chamberlain?" I said, 7 feet. He said, "Add one." I said, 8 feet. He says, "You got it." So the guy did me a favor. Don't count on that. All right. So remember the answer. Even though in all these years I have never seen this on the trade, I've seen pictures of these things, but I've never actually dealt with one. That was a test question. So it's 8 feet. Okay. And you have to increase it one pipe diameter. Okay. Also, in addition to where you come through the roof, you got to kick it up one pipe diameter. And that will be made a foot below the roof surface. All right. We covered this in the previous question with smaller pipe, like we work with it all the time. But remember that it does pop up. That part of it comes up. The 8 feet. No, you're not probably going to see that. But remember, when you go through the roof and you're coming up with the usual 1.5 inch, say for kitchen sink, you do have to kick it up to 2 inch. And 1 foot below the roof is where you're supposed to do that. Not right at the roof level. My guess is because if you go right to the roof, especially if it's not insulated, you could, I'm guessing it could cause a problem with the frost. So leave it down at least a foot. Okay. Like I said, I'm just going to cover right now what you need for these questions, and then we'll go back and cover the rest of the venting that we don't get to just with the questions. Okay, on the next page, this is 176 for anybody keeping track. This is miscellaneous wet venting. The question, I believe, was what size pipe serves as a wet vent? Minimum size pipe. And the answer is 2 inch. Okay, now most of you, you're all tier 2, you've probably all seen wet vents. But just as a review, I know we covered it. Let's do a quick wet vent. Okay, remember, if you have a wet vent, it's obviously because you most likely have a bathroom above and you need to vent the bathroom below. So what we're going to do is to just draw a sample of a wet vent. This might be a better sketch than what I did before. All right, this here is what you see in red is a wet vent. Up to about 2 inch. Now, if that's a tub, this can be 1.5 inches. If it is, it's 5 feet. Right? Same here. Lav is always 1.5 inches, so that's also possible to go up to 5 feet away from the stack. How it's vented doesn't matter. This one here is wet, clearly wet vented, right? This one's wet vented, but it's also looks like a standard individual vent. But however it's vented, the same distance applies for the pipe size. All right, now one reason I'm showing that in the chapter that I'm going to ask you to read in the book, there is a sketch of a wet vent, but instead of rolling it up, which really is accurate, those of you who've done it know you've done this. You always have to roll it higher than this line here. They roll it down. I know it's just an illustration, but I wish they had done it this way. So when you see it coming, looking like this, but coming out right here and going across, don't pay any attention to it. All right, it's the same thing. Okay, now they're also getting into circuit and loop vents, which I wish they didn't because that's pretty far along. But anyway, we can quickly touch on a loop vent and a circuit vent. And they mentioned the two types. Okay, this one is just an introduction. Now this, I don't believe, I know we haven't talked about it this year, so. I know I had some of you last year and we did this, but also there's some people I didn't have last year, so I'll assume that you have not had this. Okay, a battery vent. Usually a commercial job. It could be done residential. I never did one, a residential battery vent, but it could happen. Okay, one is called the loop and one is called the circuit. Okay, remember these names. Now, the loop vent, I found the easiest one to remember, so I'll do that one first. All right, you got to stack. Gotta make it as simple as I can. And off of this, you're going to have water closets like this. Now, some of you have already done this. Out in the trade. So this would be like a 4x3Y for each of these, right? Remember, you can't put more than 2 water closets on the 3-inch line on the same floor. And in this case, you have what, 5? Now the circuit, the loop vent, comes off something like this. And it will be 2-inch, of course. And this line here is 4-inch. Okay? And the way to remember it, at least it works for me, is that this line here loops back to the main stack. It actually goes by the stack and joins up with the vent stack. Okay? So loop and circuit, they're easy to not get confused if you remember it this way. Loop loops back. Okay? Now, you notice that it vents between the last 2 fixtures. And if you have your code there on page 177, right in the middle of the page, it says circuit and loop venting. They mention this here, and they're a little vague on the rest of it. You have to go to the definitions on the circuit and loop vent. Okay, and actually they went to the definitions for the answer. So that was on page 86 and page 90. The loop is on page 90, and it's a rather long answer. But we'll go over the questions later on. Okay, but this here would explain how it goes back to the main stack. Okay, now one other thing is if I put one more floor on here, this floor that I'm putting on right now would be the same for however many floors were below it. If there's 5 floors, same thing. But there's only one difference on the top floor and all other floors. I'll show you right now. I'm in trouble with these water closets. Okay, you have the same vent. As you do up here. But there's one problem. Up on the second floor, take a look. You get a vent here, right, between the last two. And you also have a vent right here, the stack vent, right here. Because there's nothing above here. But on the first floor, or the lower floor on this sketch, you don't have that because this line now is wet, right? The stack is wet at this point. Up here it's dry because of this. So what they have is a thing called a relief vent. Right there. And of course it has to be 2-inch. Okay, now if I drew another bathroom here, it would be the same. And another bathroom and so on. Okay, so remember that. Top floor, no relief vent. All other floors, you have to have a relief vent between the stack and the first fixture. The battery vent goes between the last 2 fixtures. Okay? They called it downstream of the last fixture connection of the battery. All right, the last downstream, remember, on this sketch, we're pitching this way. So everything is downstream. So it's downstream from the last fixture. That's the last fixture. There it is. So between the last 2, I think is an easier way to phrase it. Okay, that's where you put your vent. Now, the number that it can go up to, you can have up to 8. So you can have, I'll put it right here, 2 to 8 fixtures. And they have to be floor mounted. I don't think I mentioned that. Okay, such as water closets. Can't be wall mounted. It has to be floor mounted. Okay, for the venting to work. And that's it. That's very briefly how the loop vent works. Remember now, this is a loop. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is erase it and turn it into a circuit vent. Now if I do it carefully, I won't have to change a lot of the sketch. All right, so I'm just going to get rid of the vent. And one thing I didn't mention, you can also, if you want, you can put like a floor drain in here. And just keep count of what you've got. Okay, even with the floor drain, 2 to 4 inch probably, not less than 2. You still have less than 8, so you're okay. Now, if you want to do the rules are the same. It's just the stack is in a different place. All right, so you come off again between the last 2 fixtures. Like that. Okay, stack is the same. You could be bigger than 2 inch on this vent stack, depending on how many fixtures you have, as this could obviously be bigger than 4 inch if it's a big enough building. But the code sketches, I believe, I don't remember any of them going bigger than 4 inch. So we stop at 4 inch. If the code doesn't go bigger, there's no need for us to. All right, one thing I didn't put in yet is the relief vent. The relief vent comes off at the same place, just before the stack. The difference is now that the vent is going slightly uphill to the right, where before it was kind of pitching up to the left. Remember, your vents always have a little bit of pitch in them. If you get up in the attic and inspect the spots that your vent is dead flat, it's laying on the floor joist, you might hear about it. Okay, so always give it a little bit of pitch. I don't know that they ever mention how much. It's not 1/4 inch to the foot, but you got to show something. So it's pitching up, in this case, to the right, up and to the right. Your relief vent is right here. Okay, so this vent here is the relief vent. In the other sketch, if you remember, we came out of here and went to the left. Okay, so this one is called a circuit vent, right? So this is the circuit version of the one that was just up here. Okay, so let's get rid of this. Don't want to confuse anyone. Now we have a circuit vent. Okay, I didn't put the lavs in there intentionally, but if I did, I would probably extend this out a bit and stick some lavs in, but they would not be part of the battery, right? They would tie into the vent, but they would not be considered part of the battery at all. Okay. All right, I'm going to cut off here, and we're going to pick it up on the other side. So I'll see you in a minute.